We just came through eclipse season, and what a perfect time to learn more about the moon. And you can't get a better resource than Stephen Forrest's Book of the Moon, available on audiobook narrated by me. A direct link is available on the homepage of hightimelinebooks.com, or you can go to Audible or Apple Books. Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thomas Miller along with Robert Glasscock, and we have a question that's relevant here probably more to 2024 and 25, but we wanted to tackle it because it's a good question, and a lot of the synthesis and pattern that we're going to be in for the next 20 years is covered in this question.
Hi, Thomas and Robert. Thank you so much for all of your content. I always look forward to listening to you both. I wonder if you can shed some ideas or some insight on these two planetary interactions. I am an Aquarius sun and moon, and Pluto is currently in Aquarius. I'm 59 years old, and I am in my second Saturn return. Saturn is in Pisces. And I just thought that those two planetary interactions happening at the same time might be some interesting information you could shed light on for all of the listeners. Thank you.
All right. Well, as a sun, moon, and Aquarius, she doesn't mention the degrees, but she doesn't have to. Transiting Pluto is in the process of entering Aquarius. It's tiptoeing back into Capricorn briefly, but it will be in Aquarius until 2044. And when a major planet like that enters a sign, even if you don't have a planet at 0 or 1 degree of the sign, just the ingress into the sign itself will be felt. And transiting Pluto is a once-in-a-lifetime aspect going over her sun and moon. Its cycle is 244 years, so nobody alive has ever had this. And in a solar chart with Aquarius on the first cusp, Pluto rules her 10th cusp, which is her career, but it's also her life structure, the 10th house. And that is changing dramatically. Second of all, she's got the transit of Saturn and Saturn return in Pisces in her solar chart second house, which again is externally money. Internally, the second house is your self-worth. So, and she's 59. So something happens for everybody around age 60, and that is that the solar arc planets all sextile their birth positions. So in terms of solar arcs, age 60 is a sort of cosmic reset of a very positive kind, because all of the solar arc planets are now sextile their positions at birth, which is an aspect of self-realization and growth and advancement and coming together holistically inside yourself. So now she's got transiting Pluto going over, or at least entering, her sun-moon sign. And Pluto, along with Scorpio, symbolizes a figurative death and rebirth process. So she is literally ending a whole phase in her life, and with the Saturn return, which is a 29.5-year cycle, she's ending basically the past 30 years of her life. Things are naturally dying, figuratively speaking now, and simultaneously being reborn. So it behooves her, especially with Saturn's return in her Pisces second house solar chart, to look at her self-worth. What does she want? And this is a very serious time with Pluto and Saturn. What does she want to do with the rest of her life in terms not only of earning a living, but in terms of giving her gifts and her experience back to the collective in some form of service? This Saturn return awakens her natural, innate compassion. She will come out of a background that will have presented her with a certain amount of challenges and difficulties and even perhaps tragedies or traumas in early life, from which she has learned and has grown and emerged. So she's in a unique position here to bring everything that she has learned about transforming her life over all these years to other people. So it's a wonderful time to think about using her experience and her smarts, and maybe even astrology. She is a Sun, Moon, Aquarius, to counsel people or to get involved in social service organizations that are geared toward healing various demographics, the poor, children, disenfranchised, all of those general areas. So this can be a really wonderful time for her.
I'm intrigued by this, especially you mentioned the sextiles that happen at age 60 from the solar arc chart to the natal planets. I'm just curious, Robert, and I know we might have to go back to this happened a long time ago. We might have to go back to the National Archives. Can you remember back to when you were 60? Did you have some fundamental transformational situation happen? Sorry, I couldn't help that.
Well, no, I'm really trying to think back, which I don't.
I did. I just wondered if you did. And I'll tell you mine in a minute, but I was just curious.
Yeah, I
if
did
you...
too. I did
okay,
too. Okay,
what? Yeah, what happened?
Well, at age 50, after 30 years in Los Angeles, I first moved to Las Vegas, thinking that I could still write for television from Las Vegas. I hated living there. And I also could see in my horoscope that I thought my mother and stepmother looked like they might die in about 3 years. So I thought, well, if you believe that, you want to be back in Arkansas for that. So I moved back here in 94 when I was 50. 10 years later is when I finally, because I was able to do astrology full time in LA because it was before the days of computers, so it was all in person. But I had that huge potential client base and that population of some, 14 million Southern Californians. But I didn't have that in Arkansas. And it wasn't until I'd been here 10 years later, 2005, that the internet was becoming ubiquitous. And I could once again do astrology full time. And it was a huge, because that's when I began, I think, around that time, teaching for Kepler College, which I did for 15 years until I got so busy with clients that I couldn't do that anymore. So yeah, it was a definite breakthrough period for me.
Wow. And remember, the iPhone did not come out until 2007. So you're talking right about that same time, which was that technological explosion helped you get back into astrology with clients now around the world.
Absolutely. And you know that technology is ruled by Aquarius and Uranus.
Okay, now let me tell you what happened in 2019. So I had to go back in my mind too. It's like, ooh, this is getting a little far away. So I walked back to 2019. Well, 2018-19 is when I was starting to look at astrology from Noel Teal's book about career astrology. Like, wow, I might be able to make a go of this with some kind of a career. And that's when I started to really ramp up. Started the Fun Astrology podcast in early 2019, and then you and I met a couple of years later. So that shift in my own life into full-time astrology, where it was able to make some money because I was able to get some audiobooks with Steve. So it's like, wow, all of a sudden then readings and everything else, and then the work that we've been doing, all of that came from exactly that sextile that you're talking about.
Well, and this listener question, since she does have her sun and moon in Aquarius, and Pluto is entering that, it makes me wonder about the rest of her chart. If she has a good chart for being an astrologer, and if she does, this is the time to give birth to that as a second career.
Should anybody who is interested in astrology and has favorable aspects around Uranus or Aquarius, should they be thinking the same?
Absolutely.
And even if they just looked at that part of their chart, it's that strong.
And in her solar chart, Thomas, which places her sun and moon on the ascendant, she has Pisces on the second cusp. And Saturn in Pisces, Saturn return. Pisces on the second cusp will often show multiple sources of income or multiple careers, at least two. So even though she's only approaching 60, she may not want to retire from her regular job, but she could begin to incorporate practicing astrology as a secondary income stream. And down the road, when she retires, astrology could become her primary income stream.
So, I've got this story with Judy Diamond from St. Louis, who I've been trying to work on this radio stuff with. She has a friend who they're in St. Louis, two Midwestern gals. And this friend has a son in San Diego. And the son calls his mom one day and says, "Mom, I need my exact time of birth." Well, his mom is into astrology. She knew exactly why the question was coming up, but she said, "What's going on? What do you need to know?" And of course she gave it to him, but the boy said, "Mom, I can't make friends out here unless I know my big three. The sun, the moon, and the rising sign. That people won't talk to me." He's a Gen, whatever the 20 people in their 20s are. And he was like, and if that's happening on the coast, and you having lived out here for 30 years, I'm sure you watched a bunch of trends incubate in Los Angeles and eventually make their way to Little Rock and Omaha and Kansas City and beyond. And are you thinking that with this transit of Pluto through Aquarius, that astrology is going to really take off like this boy who can't make friends without it?
Absolutely. Aquarius is revolutionary in a lot of ways, and so is Pluto. But Aquarius does rule astrology. Neptune does too. Pisces and Neptune do too. But particularly Uranus always has. And the idea of Pluto now being in Aquarius for the next 20 years, it would not surprise me that what you're saying absolutely comes true, that there is a renaissance in using astrology.
So all these people who have been thinking, I should learn astrology and I should try to get to a point where I can do readings, yes, is basically the answer. Yes, it's coming.
Well, for me, I have never found any tool in my life that has been as valuable for self-help and self-development as astrology. Second to this was psychology. And I recommend group psychology to anybody. But that's second to astrology, because I once gave a lecture, believe this or not, to a luncheon at the UCLA Medical Association. I'd been reading for several doctors and their wives and so on. But I said to this group, if you think psychology is a science, then you have to consider astrology as one, because astrologers can go one better. They can look at a chart and in 60 seconds tell you, this person is, in those days, we called it manic depressive. Today, we call it bipolar. But you can look at a chart and immediately tell if someone is potentially bipolar. But you can go a step further. You can say they will be manic in December, January, and February. They will be depressive in June, July, and August. So you get timing out of astrology. You don't get this anywhere else. There's not another technique or science on earth that gives you this timing, and it's invaluable. You can look ahead and say, well, what do I want to do with this aspect that's coming up? So suddenly now you are very consciously co-creating your life. And if you use it correctly, astrology is really the opposite of fate. Every planet, every point, every aspect, every house has a negative and positive meaning. But if you can make those meanings conscious, then you can choose the positive sides of everything. And it's a wonderful way to live. Trust me.
There's one other thing I'd like to cover here. You mentioned this solar chart and setting this up based on the information she gave us, which was that her sun and moon are in Aquarius, and then she's having her second Saturn return in Pisces. And you set this chart up just mentally from that. Can you walk through for people how to do that so that people could do that with their own? And then what's the value of that? Of course, it's all the information we had, but what else is the value of that solar chart?
It's very valuable. I teach people, we all have 3 charts. We have a timed birth chart. If you have a birth certificate time, that's one. Then we have a solar chart, which is simply placing the sun on the first cusp and using equal houses. And that's the solar chart. And then we have the natural wheel, which is 0 Aries on the first cusp, and place your birth planets in that wheel. So you have really, we all do, 3 charts to look at. There are limitations with the solar chart and the natural wheel chart in terms of precision. But they are all 3 valuable, and they all 3 give you a different perspective on your life, and they're all 3 fascinating to study. So if I'm in a party situation and somebody, well, what can you tell me about me? Well, all I have to know is their birthday. And I mentally picture that sun on the first cusp, and I know where the transits are. So I can start reading them extemporaneously. And have done it. I don't do it since COVID, especially. We don't do parties, but it's fun to do, but it's also accurate. So I encourage people to do that, to simply take your sun and put it on the first cusp, and then look at the rest of the wheel that you get from that. The planets will be in different houses. And then take the natural wheel, starting with 0 Aries. Put your birth planets in that and study it.
Well, this has been incredibly informative and just so practical, too. This is a great question. Thank you to our listener who sent this in. And we appreciate your kind words for our little effort of what we're doing here as well. We put in the show notes of every episode all the information you need. We've got a Discord channel, and Robert's link for readings is in there. If you just check that out, it has all the latest of what's going on around the podcast. We also have a listeners group on Facebook. It's called the Subconscious Mind Mastery and Fun Astrology Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we are kind of reactivating that. We'd love to have you come join that if you're a listener. And we will see you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great day.